Hey Paradise people, welcome back to the podcast and our radio show here at Bobo 89.1 FM. I am Bella Rooney, your host, and today we are continuing our new series. Well, not so new now, I guess, oldish series. Well, we're almost at the end. We're doing great. We've had some amazing interviews. So our series, Nature Positive, sponsored by Sustainable Cayman. Each month we talk to a new guest on a different subject relating to a move towards nature positivity. Last month we met with the Ministry of Planning, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure's Senior Policy Advisor, Mr. Nash, and planning and environmental lawyer, Miss Anna Russell-Nee, and chatted about agriculture, sustainable farming, all those incredibly important things for the future of Cayman and sustainability here. So make sure you go back and check that out. This month, though, we're going to be chatting about species recovery with Frank Roulstone, Executive Director for the National Trust of the Cayman Islands. Good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon.
How you doing?
Fabulous.
Busy day. Busy day, but good day.
Yep.
All right, so, Frank, you've done all sorts of bits and bobs. You've been in Cayman for a long time. You've born and raised here?
Yes.
Right? Born and raised. So you've seen this island change. So tell us a bit about yourself. How did you end up working as Executive Director for National Trust? And how have you seen the island change over the years in terms of our species, I guess?
Well, that's a lot of stuff for one
question.
For one question, but I'll see what I can do.
Okay, number one.
Yeah, so I've been in the private sector my whole life. Working primarily in the alcoholic beverage and food distribution businesses. I did take a break from that career back in 2004 when I took on the role as General Manager of the National Trust, 1 week exactly before Hurricane Ivan.
Oh God.
So you can imagine what that was like. Anyhow, I stayed there for another 4.5 years, and then I eventually returned in just September of last year. So even though my role has been primarily in the private sector business management, the role as Executive Director actually includes a lot of business management, which is good. But coupled with that is my passion for everything Cayman that I've had since I was a kid. So my father specifically made sure that we had a boat from the time we could walk, I think, of some sort, and so I grew up with a real respect for the ocean, initially, and then I eventually turned my interest to exploring the terrestrial environments of Cayman, and through that exploration I realized that the historic and environmental aspects of Cayman are inextricably linked. So basically I ended up with a love for everything about Cayman's history and environment, so kind of a wide subject. So, as my grandfather always said, jack of all trades, master of none. But,
I get that as well. I get that all the time.
But yeah, so I have my own specific little interests. I've always been really interested in orchids, for example. But I also very aware of the biodiversity of the Cayman Islands and all 3 islands. So. Was there another part of that question?
Well, no. How have you seen it change since you were younger? Has it changed a lot from then to now?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I grew up in what is now the immigration headquarters in Georgetown.
Oh my days.
When I grew up, that was a marl road, and it was a really cool neighborhood. No one had a lot, but we all had what we needed, and so we sort of grew up, respecting each other and having we had a nice community, and I think that's one of the things that's really changed actually, is that a lot of what used to be community is now just, there's not really a lot of community anymore in my mind.
And community and environment are also linked, right?
Yeah, of course, and I take places like Hutland and Northside, which I still consider to be one of the last real communities in Cayman where people actually live together and they all know each other and they all look out for each other and everything. So. I guess I shouldn't really say that that's the only one, but that's one that pops to mind when I think of community.
So, biodiversity. What exactly does that term mean?
I'm not going to give you a scientific term because I'm not a scientist, but biodiversity means to me, you can look at it 2 ways. It's the measure of the number of species that are in our environment. And you can look at it on a macro level, and you can look at it on a very micro level. So there are probably, 700 and something species of plants in the Cayman Islands alone. It might be more than that, I don't even know, but we continue to discover, believe it or not, new records of plants that have somehow been overlooked. over the centuries. And then you can look at biodiversity from a really, really micro level, and you take something like the blue-throated anole on Grand Cayman, which is an endemic species, so it's found nowhere else in the world. And you have a Georgetown variety, which looks one way, and then you have an Eastern District variety that looks another way. So right on the same island, we have two lizards that are the same species, but they look completely different.
So cool.
So, and that's what I think really piques my interest, is when we have the things which are really unique and different, and sometimes they just don't make scientific sense.
No, that's the coolest thing about adaptation of species, and that can't happen without biodiversity and without pressures, right? In the environment.
No, everything is, again, inextricably linked, so you remove one thing and you end up messing up everything else. So, and that's true of the marine environment as well.
Well, that's kind of my next question. How is biodiversity loss affecting Cayman here and now, currently?
I think that to really understand biodiversity loss in Cayman, we have to go back to the 1600s when the first people actually came here. And between the 1600s and the early 1700s, these islands were, I don't know if decimated would be the right word, but they were very highly exploited, primarily for hardwood, which was, they said it was mahogany, but it was probably a lot more than that was exported for the furniture trade in the UK.
Interesting.
Via Jamaica. And so the first people who came here came here as lumberjacks, I guess you could call them, woodcutters.
Really?
Yeah, and they pretty much they did a really good job of cutting out almost all of the natural forest on all three islands in a very short span of time. Of course, once you remove that forest, then you have land which becomes arable, and so they started farming. And but if you look at the original land grants that were given in this early 1700s, they were all given primarily to cut mahogany, but I'm sure there was more than mahogany that was done. So that biodiversity change occurred very early on in the process.
Yeah, no kidding.
But was done then for the same reason that it is now, exploitation of resources. So people are taking a natural environment and destroying it for the financial benefit usually of somebody. So.
And that's still happening because we're still developing at a crazy rate.
Yeah, and I think I've been in business, so I understand business. And I understand the pressures, but I also understand that we have to leave space for, if we want to have any kind of identity at all, as a country or as a people or whatever you want to call it, we have to leave some of the stuff that we found when we came here, and leave space for them and let them be able to survive, because they are, whether we like it or not, in some way. And whether we appreciate it or understand it is a different thing, but all those things play a role in our well-being. And again, that can be applied to both the marine and the terrestrial environment.
So you just mentioned one development, some of the drivers of biodiversity loss. So for instance, the Cayman parrots, they were pretty endangered, I think, for a while, right? We've had a pretty good success story bringing them back.
Yeah, and the whistling duck is another great success story.
So what was the driver? Was that development or?
Of the destruction?
Yeah.
Well, the parrots, I think, was agricultural.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, because they can be, particularly for people who have mango trees, this time of the year, they're enemy number one. But yeah, so I think that was probably a big part of it. I don't think necessarily it was development. I think that hurricane damage of nesting trees and stuff is also a huge factor, because they have to have a good tree that is hollow to nest in. And so, if they can't find a suitable habitat to raise young, the success rate is probably going to be reduced as well. Yeah. So there's a lot of different things that can really make big changes in biodiversity that I don't think we'll ever fully understand. I
know invasive species.
Oh yeah. It's another topic.
We're definitely dealing with invasive species right now, right, and their effects on...
And we've had invasive species, again, since the 1600s, starting with rats, which are not native. And rats are blamed for the eradication of all of our native mammals, other than the bats.
Really?
Or most of them anyway. We used to have the little copromus and the little geocopromus and all these little other things running around which don't exist
I don't even know what they look like.
Yeah, so the biodiversity loss, like I said, started a long time ago. It's not something which is just recent. It's been around for a long time. We had hootias, which I don't think we could blame on rats. I'm not sure what led to their demise. I'm going to assume humans. And of course, two crocodiles, saltwater and freshwater crocodiles, which were all led to extinction as well. So don't forget, man is the #1 invasive species here. So
I know. I try not to think about that as I fall asleep every night. I get a bit depressed.
Because apparently there was no one here until we came along. So.
Oh, dearie, dearie. And what about local? So you're an orchid man. What if we got flower tree-wise in terms of biodiversity and maybe loss in that? Because I know we have some pretty beautiful orchids here.
Yeah, we have in bloom now is our national flower, obviously, which is the wild banana, Myrmecophila thomsoniana. And that still, thankfully, is reasonably common, even though it is suffering from the effects of invasive scale insects, which have been introduced into the forests, which are taking a big toll on them, which is really unfortunate. But thankfully, when I did my little walk the other day, I was quite pleased to see that in the Botanic Park, for example, walking the trail now, you can still see our wild banana orchid in bloom. Dendrophylax fawcettii, which is another endemic orchid species, has been pretty much eliminated from Georgetown, other than a small area behind the community college. But thankfully, there is, in one of the National Trust reserves, we have an area that they can still be found in relatively decent abundance. And then we have my favorite, and my obsession is Encyclia kingsii, which is used to be on all 3 islands, and now the only living examples are found in Little Cayman. And that's a beautiful little orchid, which is also in bloom now.
And we have some incredible orchid forests. I was working with somebody, and she was an avid orchid lady. She just loved her orchids. Oh, hello, if you can hear me. But she was telling me about the illegal orchid trade that we had here. This is completely off subject, but have you heard about that?
Well, I know that, for example, in the BRAC, there was an industry of exporting orchids prior to regulation.
Oh my gosh.
So I couldn't say that would have been an illegal thing, but without a doubt, it probably led to reduction in a huge number of orchids in that environment. There is probably an illegal trade in all kinds of things from this island. People who don't get caught. I remember people getting caught with suitcases full of snakes and lizards and stuff, which they were taken away for the animal trade. So it's not just plants. It's people will take anything, and the funny thing is, you take something like the blue iguana, and there's a huge international demand for those types of animals, especially from people who have a lot of money, and they will pay very good money for these, to have these things as pets. We have to be really, really careful, because things like that can be eradicated very quickly if we don't keep an eye on them.
So there's an incredible amount of drivers for biodiversity loss, essentially.
Oh yeah, and primarily human-based.
Primarily. What are some natural ones? I can't even...
Hurricanes. Hurricanes,
I guess.
without a doubt, wiped out huge numbers of orchids, for example, in the environment.
So just natural events, natural disasters.
Yeah, I think there's 26 species of orchids, and there's probably about 10 of them that I don't think exist anymore. And that was primarily due to Hurricane Ivan.
Whoa.
But with a caveat, because the human altering of the environment probably resulted in the hurricane doing things that it wouldn't have done 100 or 200 years ago.
Yep.
And that could have easily led to those extirpations.
True. Interesting. Oh, golly. Okay. So let's get a bit more positive. Which initiatives are currently underway right now in Cayman to encourage species recovery? So we've talked a lot about it being gone, but we have a lot of amazing stuff that's happening on island to bring them back and to keep them going, right?
Well, obviously the big one would be the Blue Iguana project, which right now in our office, as you probably know, we have incubators with eggs being brought in almost every day from the Blue Iguana facility, and we have a much higher success rate when we care for the eggs in the incubators, and then we can raise those iguanas for 2 or 3 years until they get big enough that they're no longer as vulnerable to predation by our local snake and also our introduced invasive feral cats and stuff like that. So we do, it's a very expensive program to operate, because it means that we have to keep these animals confined, and then we have to feed them and care for them. But there's not a lot of choice because the alternative is to just see it go to extinction, and to me that's not an option.
It's not an option.
No. So that would probably be one of the big success stories in terms of species conservation. But let's not forget that our marine park laws, which Mrs. Gina Ebanks Petrie has taken a huge amount of flack for, those marine laws and marine parks make it possible that we can still go out and practice traditional historic practices like getting conchs, lobsters, and fish, because if they had not, without her foresight and others, many years ago, those things would have probably been wiped out in our natural environment, for sure. And people still continue to break the law. But at least we have some level of protection that allows my children and my grandchildren hopefully to be able to go out and do the things that I did as a kid, like go out snorkeling and get conchs, and I make a really mean marinated conch. So.
And you want to pass that down, right?
Of course.
Yeah, and you should. What about bats? Were those ever endangered here in Cayman? I know National Trust does a lot for bats.
Yeah, it's a funny thing because many years ago we had the bat lady, Lois Blumenthal, who had a very keen interest in bats, and she did a really great program, and we became sort of the bat capital of the Caribbean in terms of knowledge and care and everything. Quite remarkable. One person can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
So don't ever think that one person can't make a difference. She made a huge difference. And we carry on her programs today with bat houses and stuff. But there's not a lot of research right now, and again, I think potentially things like Hurricane Ivan may have eliminated bats from the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how many of I think it's 9 species of bats. I'm not sure how many of them still exist in nature. Yeah. Thankfully, I still see the large fruit bats in my yard in Georgetown, and I leave my papayas on the tree for them to have. But yeah, I don't know if some of the other we have a pollinating bat, for example, and I'm not sure if that still exists. We probably have to get someone to come in and figure out that for us, or get somebody to get a grant to try to figure it out.
Bring some help in. We also have obviously our turtles. That's also a massive success story. We have so many species recovery stories here. For such a small island, it's actually quite.
Yeah, and you take turtle now. I mean, you couldn't get much more historic.
Right, exactly.
Than that. So
yeah,
and it's sad because we did have to. Sad for some people that we had to give up the practice of actually turtling.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anyone who could sit back and say now that it hasn't been successful.
Yeah.
In the amount of turtles that are now developing and maturing to the age that they can actually come back and nest.
Yeah.
And really great thing for me to see is the fact that some of the ones that were released by the turtle farm tagged are now returning to these beaches to lay and stuff. I think that's just incredible. And I think again, another maligned organization is the Turtle Center, but I think it's kind of shown that we can have a little bit of history and environment in the same bag. People can still enjoy eating a traditional dish, and yet the farm can also raise turtles to an age where they can then be released and have a better chance of survival. So,
I think the link between somebody's culture and heritage and their environment is sometimes so lost. I've said it before on this podcast, but I feel like we kind of get so wrapped up in social media and phones and life and in distractions that we forget how connected and how much our heritage is connected to the land, to the ocean.
Oh yeah, I mean, look at the little lowleaf thatch tree.
Yeah.
It's an endemic palm. It's found nowhere else in the world, and it provided the shelter for every home for probably hundreds of years in Cayman. And a business of making rope and weaving and baskets and everything. I think my sister still goes out and teaches thatching.
Brilliant.
And so that is, again, another historic and environmental connection that I think gets lost. I think people have this thing that they believe that history and environment are two different things. Well, they are sometimes, but a lot of times they're just pretty much the same thing. We need to make sure that we don't let one outbalance the other, I think.
Right. What do you think is the key to a successful species recovery program?
Well, my personal opinion is that everything needs a home. So there's no point in us recovering blue iguanas if they don't have a place to live.
To go.
So we've been trying to expand the ownership of our properties out east specifically to give these animals a chance of survival in the wild. This isn't an animal that we intend to have as some type of poster child that we keep in a cage for people to look at. We need to have them in the wild. They need to survive in the wild, and in order to do that, I'm sorry, but they have to have space too. And I think that is the key to all of it, because when we make space for the iguanas out east, we're making space for a lot more than iguanas.
All the biodiversity, man.
All of the biodiversity, the plants, the insects, the reptiles. I mean, you name it. It's all part of the same thing. So in my mind, species recovery cannot exist without a place for them to live. And that's what's actually the most under threat in Cayman, is because every time you turn around, somebody's building something and they clear it flat, and then and there goes all the biodiversity, and then it takes a very long time to ever recover that once it's done.
Well, that's quite literally was my next question, is how is the ever-increasing development affecting biodiversity? And I mean...
Yeah, I think we could all do a better job of even like preserving some of the vegetation, for example, that exists on properties. If somebody goes to build a house, and the first thing they do is they clear the lot completely flat. Then they build a house, and then they expect to bring in all these plants from elsewhere to landscape, which require more water than our native species. Not only that, but we run the risk of importing invasive species through the importation of plants from other countries. And I think we'd have been better off, or people would have been better off, they left one or two trees when they were building the house, Then you wouldn't have to replace it at great cost. You wouldn't have to maintain it. And again, these things are quite susceptible sometimes to disease and insects that our plants here have been accustomed to for as long as this island has been around.
True.
So
that's a lot of waste of money if you bring in a massive palm tree and it just dies.
Yeah, I mean, we have some invasive, I think they're called Washingtonia palms here now.
Okay.
They're all over the place, and they're not native, and they are doing very well here, and they're very pretty. But at the same time, we don't know what impact that would have on anything, because it's not something that's really supposed to be here. So, but I guess my point is that I don't think that in my position at the National Trust that I could sit behind the desk and say absolutely no, you cannot build a house, and absolutely no, you cannot build apartments. But I do believe we can do a better job of development of anything, and I'm not just talking about big hotels and stuff like that. Anything, somebody building a house, somebody building anything, you leave something that's natural there.
Yeah. So somebody building a road, like the East-West Arterial Road, maybe? How do you think that the East-West Arterial might affect species recovery?
I think that is part of the reason that the Trust has been asking for this environmental impact statement. Because I don't think that any of us have the knowledge to know what impacts that road will have. It's a huge road, it's a huge project. But that environmental impact assessment doesn't really talk about just the environment of nature that it affects, because it also affects people who live in the area, and other things which need to be addressed. Drainage would be a primary concern. I mean, have we thought about, has anybody asked the question where the fill is going to come from to put this road in? Because I'm going to assume that it's going to be a 50-foot hole of very large magnitude somewhere out in that direction that will have to be quarried to provide the fill. Because of course, the other question is, how are we going to build the road? Are we going to do it the way that we've done it for the last 200 years, or we just push this stuff down and then put tar on the top of it? Or are we actually going to put drainage, account for drainage in it and stuff like that?
And it being in the central mangrove wetlands, drainage is, I think, pretty crucial, no?
Well, I mean, primarily most of the places where this road is going is either at sea level or below sea level. So there's no way that you're going to build a road there without elevating it.
Yeah, right.
So the question becomes, how do you elevate it? What method are you going to use to elevate it? And we talk about a whole lot of things to do with that road, but it has much wider impacts than just building a road. This isn't just building a road. This is somebody is going to have to provide the stuff to fill in for that road. And I know that's how it's going to be done, because like I said, that's what we've done for 200 years, the same method. So, maybe the environmental impact statement would come out and say, well, the best way to do it is this way. Maybe an elevated long bridge of some sort, and if not the whole thing, sections of it. But no, it's much easier for us just to push it in and create a huge dam, so that when the water, we get a good heavy torrential rain in October and November, we end up with having a massive lake accumulating on the south side of that road.
And that's surely going to impact the species in the mangroves.
Oh, a little impact more than that.
Yeah.
So, and again, I think that we kind of miss the point if we think that this is just an environmental issue. It really is much more than that, because we're talking about an environment. Humans live in an environment. The environment, whether we're invasive or not, we still live in the environment. So this isn't about protecting a mangrove and protecting parrots and snails and various other things. There's more to this than that. And I think we're getting pushed in a direction where it's sort of like, well, it's just these environmentalist radicals that are pushing to stop this road.
That's how it feels. Yeah, that's how I feel sometimes.
But unfortunately, I don't think that I don't know why the other people haven't been concerned about the other aspects of the road. So if it's only the environmental radicals that are opening their mouth, then maybe it's time some other people start to wake up and say,
zoom
well,
out
wait
a
a
bit
minute,
more than that.
because this isn't just, like I said, this isn't just about parrots and mangroves. I'm sorry, it's a much bigger issue than that. The other issue, of course, is who's going to pay for it, and which generation is going to be saddled with the debt of paying for it, because that is not going to be a cheap undertaking. And part of this study would be to say to us, yeah, this is what it's going to cost to actually do this road, because we can sit here and pretend that God is going to pay for this road, and he may be the only one left around to pay for
to
it.
do that. Yeah.
But we are going to pay for it. Maybe not me so much, but my children, their children.
Yeah, in multiple different
your
ways.
children,
I know.
absolutely.
In multiple different ways, environmental ways, community ways, sustainability. It's just sustainability.
And that's not even taking into consideration, like I said, the impact that the noise, the flooding, and other things may impact the people who live near to that corridor.
Yeah.
Because we saw with the Bodentown bypass, which I don't know how that could be called a bypass, but anyway, when that was built, they blocked the natural drainage, and then everyone in Bodentown started flooding. And they were rushing around putting in drains and stuff to try to stop the flooding, but they probably could have alleviated that issue if it had been built properly in the first place. But
yeah.
anyway.
But there you go. You're like, but I could talk about this all day. So, how can people get involved with keeping our species safe and helping them to recover? I mean, they don't have to be environmental, activists or crazy. What would you just call them? Environmental.
Eco. I've been called a lot of things, so
exactly.
Probably shouldn't repeat very many of them, but
they don't have to be like that. But what do you think people can do, and maybe even in their own backyards? Like you mentioned, the trees and just keeping more native vegetation.
Well, I think number one, let's start with plants. I mean, that's the easy one. We have a lot of beautiful plants that are natural and native that people can use in their existing landscaping. Of course, because it's probably easier and cheaper to bring in container loads of plants from Florida, that we bring in I hate, it just bugs me to see these little cocoa plum trees that they bring from Florida. I want to pull every single one of them up. Because I am used to a nice big cocoa plum, and these things are, I would call them, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it or not.
Baby plums.
A bastard cocoa plum is what it is, which is a common local name for things which are not what they look like. So yeah, things like that. I mean, why aren't we using our native cocoa plum in landscaping? Why aren't we using our native plants in landscaping? We're bringing in something else from elsewhere that is similar. So why can't we use what we already have? That really bugs me. So that would be the plant side of things. And then the other side of things, I think obviously responsible pet management is big on the list as well. I mean, if my dog, if I allowed my dog to roam around in the neighborhood, he'd probably kill more than just animals. You know, I keep him in a fenced-in area, and I take very good care of him.
Yeah.
And he's a very sweet dog.
Yeah.
But he doesn't belong in somebody else's property.
Yeah.
So what gives anyone else the right for their animals to come into my property?
And cats, right? Catios, having catios, don't just let your cat roam.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, responsible pet management, I think people grossly underestimate how valuable that is. Because to me, a pet is something that you love and care for. If someone is telling me that a pet is something that you feed, then God help us all, because you know, the cat roams around and gets hit by a car, and somehow that's an acceptable thing. Anyway, I probably shouldn't talk about this. It's okay. It would cause a lot of controversy on your show.
These are your opinions, sir. These are your...
we'd have to add some of these are my personal opinions.
So those are two of kind of the main ways people can help and get involved.
Yeah, two things. Yeah, there's lots more than that. I mean, you can get involved in being active. And taking an interest in these things. A lot of people don't take an interest in anything until it affects them. And you know, they don't look at the wider picture. The trees that are being cut down are providing the oxygen for us to breathe. If that isn't incentive enough to look after them, then again, you know, people need to really look at the bigger picture and get involved in stuff before it impacts them. And then maybe something impacts them and they go, well, we'll call the National Trust. The National Trust is supposed to be dealing with this, and the National Trust is probably one of the smallest organizations in the Cayman Islands, so we don't have the manpower and resources to do everything. It would be nice if we did, but.
Oh, well, do you have a last message to anybody listening of what they could do with our species?
Well, I want to say, first of all, I want to acknowledge that you as a young person really making an effort to make a difference in your community is a huge thing. So I applaud you.
Oh, thank you.
And I think that is, you know, I know a lot of young people who've had the opportunity to go overseas and study, and those who've studied here, and those who just take an interest in their future. They are now becoming involved, and don't let people put you off and call you names and stuff, because really we're talking about your future. My future here now is getting more limited every day.
Oh God.
You hopefully have a much longer future than I do. You're the people, you're the generation now that's really got to step up and say, this is what we want for our country.
I agree.
And I believe, I'm not going to say that, that's political.
Okay.
That was good. But yeah, I think young people need to take an interest, and they need to get up and get active and
fight for what they
decide what they want this country to be. So
cool. Thanks so
that would
much.
be my parting words.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us today. You know, we can't have a healthy, thriving environment or community or culture or anything without keeping the balance, right?
Yep.
And keeping the biodiversity in every aspect. Biodiversity in the way you think, the biodiversity in the environment, you know, and everything.
I like I said, I couldn't imagine anywhere else in the world that I would rather live. So why wouldn't I take an interest in what's around me?
Oh, thanks so much for coming in, Frank. We really appreciate it. And thanks for giving us your views. And thank you to DMS Broadcasting and Bobo 89.1 and my pal Ryan Kirklady from Retrospekt Media for capturing all of this. Big thank you to Sustainable Cayman for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Sustainable Cayman is a not-for-profit organization promoting conservation and environmental sustainability to create a flourishing natural environment and healthy communities. And you can follow them on Instagram at SustainableKY and at Facebook at sustainable.cayman. Also, make sure to check out their Facebook group, Wetlands Thrive, Life Survives, and make sure you check out our other filmed episodes. They're over on YouTube, and they should be pretty easy to find. Also, make sure you check us out at Protecting Paradise KY, and remember, you cannot care about these things unless you know about these things. So, thanks for joining us today, and remember, we are always open to your opinions and your topic suggestions, so don't be shy, and we'll see you next week.